and welcome to another Thinking Particles tutorial video. This tutorial video will be different in the way that this is a two-part tutorial video. So we will have part 1 where I do a scene setup from scratch and a part 2 where I show you our latest development we have here of a new tool. And this new tool is our explosion tool, and this is meant to help you creating standard or kind of the explosion effects you usually see all around when you're doing visual effects. Keep in mind, as I mentioned, this is a prototype. Right now what you're seeing is our prototyping phase, so all you see there will change for sure as we are adding more and more new functions. Along with our new fluid solver, this is meant to be our next big update we will bring out and release to all our subscription users. But before I start diving into creating and doing the first scene, the first part of the video, I want to remind you about some things here as a background. I'm doing a non-scripted video. So everything you see here is non-scripted. So I'm not reading from a prompt or having somewhere sheets where I read up what I'm saying. So this is all live recorded. I try to not stumble too much and try to think about what I'm doing next. However, there might be some jump cuts just to make it more watchable and durable for you guys. So I don't want you to endure all my little hiccups we have here. However, I'm not afraid to show you if I stumble and miss or have issues in my scene setup, because I think personally that's the most important part in tutorial videos, is the failing part. Because if you have a scripted tutorial, yes, it's nice and runs through and all is cool and fine. However, that's not the real world. You're not working in a scripted environment. You're starting fresh from scratch and run into issues. You're missing, things do not work. You just missed adding your objects, your force fields and all this stuff. So I'm more a friend of unscripted live recorded tutorial videos. And that's what I'm doing here right now. Also, you might notice our video setup, our studio setup is not ready yet. So we have this static background. So just as a background information, why the studio right now or the setup looks as it looks now. But I will switch now to the full screen view of 3D Studio Max. And I will start right away with our first part of the video, where I create the first base of our meteor shower. So what I want to create is a meteor shower where meteors shower down or rain down on a surface, and we have impact points, and on each impact we want to create a little bit of an explosion, and we want to do that obviously fully procedural, 100% procedural with Thinking Particles. Also, one note, I've never done this, but we need your likes and notifications turned on for our videos. So please click the like button and follow us on our YouTube channel, because that's important. The more we have following, the more people can see these tutorial videos, the more we can spread how cool our software visual effects product is for 3D Studio Max. Now let's start right away. Let's dive right into it. Let me switch to our 3D Studio Max screen and dive right in. This is a from scratch tutorial. So we are creating from zero every node, every setup we want to do. So the first thing I want to create probably is our plane. So that's our surface where we want to rain down our meteor shower. Probably I want to make sure we have it in a pretty good size. So let me just do that 500 by 500. Let me turn off the grid. 500 by 500 meters. So that's my landscape. And obviously that's not a really pretty landscape. So let me do some subdivisions. Come on, we're brave. Let's increase the subdivisions of our surface and let's do modifier called noise, and I'll just add the noise modifier, and we have maybe 5 meters in all directions. So it's kind of a cheap man's landscape, but just do that. And probably we want to do a 10 meters maybe. Oops, 10 meters landscape. Okay, there we go. So that's our landscape, and maybe we want to do a bit bigger. So here we go. Here we have our amazing landscape. And next thing is we dive right into thinking particles. We want to create our particle meteor shower. And doing so is I'll just go into particle systems. There's our thinking particles. I'll just click, and it doesn't matter where you place this helper. This is just a little bit of container or helper object, and it doesn't matter where you place it. So I just placed it somewhere. And this container keeps all our visual effect system, all our dynamic sets. That's what we call each individual setup of a visual effect. So let's move on and bring up our user interface of thinking particles. Let me just bring up this user interface of our thinking particles and just shrink that down a little bit so that we have some room to work with and breathe. So the first thing we want to create is a few dynamic sets. So what I'm going to do is create at least 3 dynamic sets. One I always name create, but that's how I do it. You can name it whatever you want. The next one I usually name sim for simulation, and then we have our specialty, our explosion. I'm not using the explosion prototype right now in this part 1 because we're still setting up our part 1. So the explosion tool will be in part 2. What are we going to do? The easiest way is to create our meteors is just creating particles. And I'm pressing now the tab key while I'm clicking into the dynamic set. We are in the create dynamic set. That brings up our node list. And I'm going to use a position-born operator. So I'm choosing the position-born operator. There we go. And the position-born operator, as the name says, needs a position. So the next thing, same deal, press the tab key. I need something that creates a position. And here's my position operator. So, and the position operator is not what I wanted, and I told you I mess up. Sorry, we are using this later on. I don't need a position operator. I don't want to set the position of a particle. I want to grab a position from somewhere. And I guess the easiest is I'll create a position. So let me just create a position by just pressing tab again. And I'll use a point 3. 3 points in space is a position, remember? So I'm using this one. And I'll just feed that in. So now, how do I know where the position is and what's going on? So here we have our X, Y, Z value. And right now, meteor showers are from way above. So we all know we live on a flat Earth, right? And above is above the flat Earth. So above means Z-axis. And we say 50 meters. Because we know sky ends at about 100 meters and everything else is just made up. So, but we are in the visual effects business, so we can even make round Earth and all what we want. So here we go. 50 meters up is our position. Now position-born will create particles. Let me create, let's say, 5 particles per second. We don't want to have a kind of end of the world scenario. So 5 particles per second sounds good to me for now. So lifespan let's just make sure we hit the ground. I'll make the lifespan 100 frames. Speed, let's see, about 50 meters, and the rest I think is fine. Our setting is fine. So now if I close down this here and play back, we can see, yeah, we have our meteor shower. There's only one problem. The meteors are going above the space where there's nothing. So we have to turn around our meteor shower. And I guess I would just use a -1 for our direction. So here we can set the direction, and -1 means we're pointing down with our vector. So let's try now if that works. And here we go. Would you believe it? There's our meteor shower. And as I mentioned, we don't want to have too many meteors falling down, and we can maybe increase a little bit the speed. So how about 80 meters? And let's see. Okay, that looks good. Now the only other issue I have here right now is when we look here from the side, just scale this full screen, we can see our particles just go through our Earth, and that's not good. We don't want to have that happen, that the meteors go through this Earth or plane. So what are we doing now? So let me just go to our thinkingParticles. I'll bring up our user interface. And now we're going into the simulation, because now we're doing something really amazing. What we want to do is a U deflector, universal deflector, our most versatile tool in thinkingParticles. And you can apply this to any mesh. So the only thing you need to do is feed in or supply the node or the object in 3D Studio Max. So I'm doing that with a node helper. So I'll bring up the node helper, and here's the node output. So now I have the node helper connected with our U deflector, universal deflector. And now what I want is, I know that right away because I'm doing the tutorial. So I read what we want as an outcome. I just want the event. I just want to know if we collide with the floor. So I turn on event only. And I probably want to have as a collision the size of the particle. That's our collision distance or collision sphere, or however you want to call it. So the only thing missing right now in our setup is it won't work because we didn't tell what should collide with our U deflector. And what we want to have colliding with our U deflector is the particles we created. But I see we didn't create any particle groups right now. And that's very bad. So I did a very bad thing here, because I forgot and I was lazy and I just used the all group. Never use the all group, because all group means all. And that's a big mess. Never do that. So how do we fix our mess? We just go to create, and then we create our group. How should we name it? What do you think? Oh, long click. You need to do a long click, sorry, and we name it Meteors. Meteors. Thank you for your suggestions. I expected that you wanted to name it Meteors. So Meteors, and here we go. Now we want to access our meteors, and I'll just click this particle group in here and connect it with the U deflector. So what's happening now is, let's see what's happening, because I'm a little bit, I want to know what's going on here, and just did strange. Let me just rotate our view here. Okay, here we go. And let's see what's happening now. Okay, so we can see we still don't have any collision with our surface. That's because we didn't pick the node. Again, I made a mistake. That's usually how you go. You set up, you know what you want to do, but there's more behind it. We need to pick our node so that we can supply this information to our universal deflector. Now we should have something here going on. Let's see. See? Something is happening or not. Still, we now have everything here turned on. However, nothing is happening because I turned on event only. So when I turn off the event only, and now when we play back, just play, we will have this correct effect, the bouncing effect. However, as I mentioned, that's not how meteorites work. Yes, they bounce a little bit off depending on material and if they vaporize and all this kind of stuff. But for sure, they're not bouncing like that. So, and I told you I only want the event only, and I'll turn off the bounce. I don't want to bounce. So why do I want to have that? We need to make sure when we collide with the surface, I want to create something else. So right now I'm just getting the event out of the U deflector. So what I want is when my meteor collides with the surface, I want to create a new particle there that represents my explosion or my whatever effect I want to do. So how would I do that? I would do that in a way, let me just move here a little bit. So what we are going to do is, the first thing I think is we create a new particle at the position where the collision happens. So we are going here and another position born operator. Now I want to create my new particles. And I want to pass on the position of the collision, or at the point or time when a collision happens, only then. So I'll go here, connect the collision output, which is a Boolean output. So when there's a collision, it flags a 1 and it activates our position born. So now I have the position, and it's only happening when we have a collision there. And then we create new particles. And because we are talking about position, I'll go in there and create a new particle group. And guess what? I just call that group positions. So now I'll create my impact positions with new particles. And I want one particle exactly per call with a lifespan of 30, that's fine. No speed, it should just be glued on the surface. And that's all. That's all I want right now. So I'll create a particle here at the impact point. See if that works. And we can see here, we have sticking particles. Also, we can see them here. So let me just let's select our positions, and I'll just make a different color. Let's just make something like that for our particles. And here we can see the particles that are created and sticking on the surface. Just make that full screen. And we see here we have everything there. And after 30 frames, they just die. So the next thing is that's not a real problem, but it's not pretty as well. When we look from the side, we can see we create these new particles, but these particles float on forever. And that's usually not a problem. However, when you're working with meshing and all this kind of stuff, it could be that your space expands so big that other calculations might freak out. So it's never a good idea to have particles go out into infinity. So what I'm doing right now is, because I already know when they collide, we can just say particle die. And I'll just use the particle die operator, where we say these meteor particles should die whenever they collide. So what I did here is also very simple, straightforward. These particles should die whenever they collide. And now here comes the importance of the order in this tree. We have our U deflector, universal deflector here, up there. That doesn't matter. It's the most important part is this one here and the particle die. So we have first our position born. So our position is created, our new particle is created, and then our particle dies. So now, when I play back, we should not see these white particles underneath our surface. Particles die and create these new position particles. So now, just to explain why I'm doing all these setup and things, let me show you. I can just go into our position particles and let's do something. Let's say 50 meters, and I'll create per position, let's say 50 particles. That's it. Okay. So what I did now is, instead of creating one particle, I create 50 particles now on each impact side. And there we go. Sometimes that's enough, and we could do a variation of the speed. For example, let's go here and have a speed variation. Then we can fill up our particles a little bit more, and sorry, 100. Oh, I'm still playing back. Sorry, let me make this. I think I have my numlock off. Yeah, that was my numlock was off. Anyhow, let's go back. And now you can see with this variation, we can create some dust plumes or whatever we want to do. However, the idea of this tutorial is I want to show you our new prototype explosion tool that helps you in getting the usual explosions like sandblasting or blasting soil, fuel, gasoline explosions, and all this kind of advanced explosion stuff. And as I mentioned, we're working on a prototype there. And that's in the second part of the video. In the second part of the video, I will show you how easy it is with our explosion tool to integrate these things. So let me just turn all this back to initial one particle, no speed, everything is turned back now. And let's just check here. Yeah, so now we have one particle on impact. The particle is in the positions group, and that's it. So now I've prepared everything we want to do, and now we are going to work on our explosion tool. And that's the part 2. So I will stop this recording now, and I will start with the part 2. It will be in one long video, so just stay tuned. Part 2 is in a few seconds. Hello, this is part 2. As promised, we are now continuing. However, don't be surprised when you see a different scene. I had to redo it because my Macs didn't like me and crashed, so I had to redo all the steps. But no worries, it's the same setup. We start from the same situation, and I'll tell you now about our prototype tool that creates explosions. Let me switch, or One more thing before I switch to the full screen 3D Studio Max and we're diving into how to set up the explosions. Let me remind you about, please subscribe, press the bell button and like this video. It helps us a lot. Thank you so much. And now let me switch to the full screen monitor and we're back in 3D Studio Max. And let me just bring up, or let me just so that you see where we left off. We have these particles raining down, sticking to the ground. And now we are going to open our thinkingParticles user interface. And the next thing we wanted to do is our explosion tool. And the explosion tool is a prototype we're working on right now. So it would be nice if you give us some feedback in the comments or send us feedback through our Discord channel, whatever you prefer. We are happy for any feedback. So the explosion tool is meant to create these Hollywood-style explosions and allow you to easily and very fast set up the look of your explosion. And I'm talking about how the fireball looks like, how a dust explosion looks like, how the shape looks like, and if you want to have shockwaves, 1 shockwave, 2 shockwaves, 3, 4, 5, 10, a million shockwaves, however you want it, as many shockwaves as you like. So let's do it. The explosion tool we are preparing right now is, as I mentioned, a prototype. So all the settings you see there will change, or we might add, or probably will add a few more controls. It's a system. So what does that mean? Instead of creating one super node, we are creating a system of smaller nodes. However, we take the pain away for you to create all these smaller nodes and think about how can I control this and what do I need to connect. So this is why we now introduce for the first time system creation. So what we deliver with the new upgrade of thinkingParticles that you will get in the future is a system. So you will find all our new tools on the black boxes systems. And here's our first system we're still working on, is the explosion system. So I just clicked there. It's like creating a node. However, you'll find it under systems. And let's have a look at this node. So as mentioned, it's a system. So it's made of multiple nodes that are already pre-wired and connected for you. So you save a lot of time. You can drop that in any way you want. So you remember we did the setup with the meteor shower, collisions, and all this stuff. Now I just dropped in this explosion tool setup. And when we have a look at our explosion tool setup, we can see this funny text here. Move it so that you can read it easy. So this text says you need to pick the node, exclamation mark. And that's what I wrote to myself, because the only thing here in the tool that has an external dependency is the kill plane. So what we wanted to have in the node is just a kill plane for safety. It's a good way of working to have kill planes or kill volumes. So for example, when you do fluid simulations, you want to have a kill box around your scene, just to make sure no particle escapes by accident. The problem with escaping particles, they can go to infinity, and infinity is a big number. It's infinity. And calculating with infinity is fun for mathematicians, but it's not fun for 3D Studio Max. It's not fun for Windows, because there's no such thing as infinity amount of memory. So having particles going to infinity, it's not good. Buzz Lightyear, maybe infinity and beyond, but not for particles. So this is why it's usually a good idea to have a kill volume, so a box around your scene, so that you can make sure, okay, no particle is going further than this. And with the kill plane, it's the same deal. We want to make sure nothing goes below our surface. Because we are creating explosion particles arbitrary in space, we don't know if some particles are beneath the surface. So the kill plane is just there to make sure we kill particles below. We could get away without that. However, the setup is now with kill plane. So I need to pick the surface. So that's what I did. Just picking the plane, that's it. So I did one little thing here and no modifications at all. So now that's all I did. I brought in with the right click, remember, right click, black boxes, systems, explosion. That's how I brought in, and I have everything set up for me here. Only thing we did here is we create these particles, the meteors, then with our collision universal deflector, we create the particles at the point of where the collision happens, and we put them in the position particle group. So that's all we did here. And then bring in our explosion. So now let's have a look how our system looks like. Let me just close this down and just play. And keep in mind, this is all real-time playback. We are recording this video, have 4K video recording at the same time, simulation with collision detection, everything going on here. So as we can see, we have a lot of things going on here automatically. So I would suggest we concentrate on one particle so that I can show you our tool and ask you for your feedback, what else you want to control. So let me just go back to our setup, and we're going into our meteor shower. And instead of creating 5 particles per second, I just create 1 particle. That's it. I want to have 1 particle here, and that's it. So see if that works. Okay, here we go. Nice. We have 1 particle. And I can see there's more stuff going on than the pure explosion. So let's have a look what our explosion tool does. And once more, I'm going to reduce the complexity right now. So I'll click our explosion tool here, and we are going to turn off the debris and the sand. So I don't want any extra particles that we want to simulate right now with the debris and sand. So I turned them off. And I also don't want any trails or strokes here or shock waves. I don't want to create any shock waves. If I wanted to create a shock wave, I would just say, okay, I want 1 shock wave ring. Make sure the impulse is not that high. So just let you know we have here the shock wave. Oh, we need 45. That's what I want to type in. And then you can see we have our shockwave ring here. And we can have 2 shockwaves, 3 shockwave rings, as many as we want. And maybe we need even F. Okay, here's our shockwave. Just to show you what we are planning or doing here with our tool. So we have a lot of controls here. You can do all kinds of explosions. As I mentioned, we want to have this underground soil explosions that usually have this spike-like look, and then the dust around it, or gasoline balls or gasoline explosions that are coming out of a constricted volume or whatever. So we want to make sure we can sculpt our explosion and how it looks like. So to do that, I'll show you right now how it looks. Let me just bring that aside and make this view a little bit bigger. So as you see, we have this typical look of the impact where we have this dense core of material blowing up, and on the side, the lighter materials and dust settling there. So that's our shape of the explosion. However, what if I want a different shape for my explosion? Let's say we will have a look from the top, and I want a different look for my explosion. So let's do that. What I'm going to do is, let's have a look at the expansion curve. The expansion curve controls the look of our explosion. And we added this expansion curve to make it easier to control the important part of your explosion, or how the explosion should look like. And with the expansion curve, we can sculpt the look of our explosion. Right now, as I mentioned, we have these spikes that represent kind of underground soil blasting. And now I'll just show you, I'll overdo it a little bit like so. And then you will see that the shape totally changed. We have now a much spikier look. Let me just move that over here, and I'll just play back again, and we get this kind of look. So now if we wanted to, let me just back a little bit flat, just do it a little bit like so, you get a totally different look. And if we wanted to see in real time how our look or how our curve affects the look, we would just go here and turn off edit on the fly. That means now every time we change something, we will restart the simulation and we will see the instant influence. So it will go through the 32 frames and show us the look. So if I move like so, we can actually see how our explosion curve looks like. And if I wanted the opposite, like more of an explosion, water bomb explosion, that would be more like a water bomb or something like so. Or if I wanted to have the classic blast-like structure, let me just move it something like so, not bigger than that. So we get a more looking explosion like that, but we have to change a little bit more of the distribution, something like that. Or we could just delete this key as a whole, and then we can just adjust our other aspects here, like the radius curve, minimum curve, and the mass curve. That is the distribution of mass within our explosion. So mass is controlling friction and acceleration. So you can decide how you want to distribute the mass, and that will also decide on how particles are moving around in the explosion part. Here a little bit. You see it has a little bit of an effect because we did not play around a lot with the mass. But this is how you can sculpt your explosion. And there is other parameters as well that define our explosion. For example, the opening angle. So I can just widen our explosion, or we have a full blast explosion of 90 degrees in all sides, and that would give us the explosion here. And then we can just go back and have a look at our explosion, how this blast looks like. And then we, as I mentioned, we can work with the min and max radius, where we can have even more control of the distribution. And let me just show you from above. We can see how this affects our distribution. Let me just go to 1. So now we have this kind of explosion. And this can create all kinds of interesting and cool effects we have here. So you can sculpt in each axis and direction. Just bring that back to 0 so that we fill our volume. And the same is with our radius min curve, where we can have Same deal here. Let me just bring that up to down to 0. And now we have the other way around explosion. So we have a lot of tools where we can sculpt our explosion or explosions, and we can create very fast and easy explosions we want to have here. That's our tool, and the beauty of it is you just drop it in as I showed you. We adjust the parameters of our explosions, and as I mentioned, we have a lot of parameters to adjust here, and we can control the number of particles, for example, the impulse of our explosion, how much spread we want in our explosion. So now I have a more even spread in our explosion. So the volume is more like an atomic bomb explosion. And as I mentioned, we can something like that, more a flat-like pancake explosion over time. We can add keys, as I mentioned before, so you can even add multiple keys. So we have this kind of explosions. So flat-like shockwave explosions. Just do that here. And here. And have this inverted explosion, or we bring up thing here to 1 and bring. So now we have this inverted explosion. So we can sculpt all kinds of explosions we want, and we can everything to 1. And as you can see, it's fully procedural, and there we have our gasoline spherical explosion, and we can have shock waves, as I mentioned. We can create shock waves. Just create a shock wave here. Just go down to shock waves. We put the shock wave to 1, or maybe 2 shock waves, and then we have 2 shock waves that are running, 1 shock wave, another shock wave, all kinds of settings and stuff. And as I mentioned, as a little surprise, there's a part 3 that will follow up with the tutorial, but the part 3 will be a totally different scene, and we will do totally different things, and it gets more into the deep how to actually create a volumetric effect. We are using Final Fluid, our real-time fire and smoke simulator, and we will be controlling Final Fluid with our thinkingParticles explosion tool setup. And it will show you how easy it is to get a fast explosion, fast-looking explosion, really cool stuff. I know, this video is getting really long now. However, let's have some more fun and dive deep into the visual effects. Before we do so, let's have a look at the scene as we have it right now. And keep in mind, this is not a Hollywood blockbuster scene. This is a tutorial video to explain how the principle works, how we did the setup here. And this applies to all kinds of scenes and visual effects you might need to do in the future. So let me just show you the result we have right now, and then I'll tell you how we can achieve this. The interaction with rigid body dynamics and everything. So let's have a look right now how we did this effect and what things we have to be considerate about. Let's dive into our 3D Studio Max scene. I'll open the scene I have here, and we can see we have a pretty dense mesh here. So let me just turn off. So that's all the mesh. So if we go really deep in, we can see the mesh density is insane we have here. So we have this landscape, and we are going to work with these high resolution mesh. So please excuse if the PC will take some time because we're doing a 4K recording as well, audio recording, and so on. Let me just play back as it is right now, and keep in mind we are having thousands of particles and now with meshes as well. So these are not just points in space, these are meshes with collision detection, rigid body, and everything in there. So let's just play back the thing as we have it now. So now it approaches, it deforms the surface as well in this setup. Now we have our meteorite destroyed, debris flying around. Now we have the rigid body collision going on, and we get our nice explosion effect here. So let me just stop that here, and oh, that's a huge landscape. And we can see here's our debris flying around, collision, and we have even smaller sand particles as well, which are also colliding and doing all their things. So everything is happening here in real time while we are doing the video recording as well. So that's the scene setup. It's basically the same we did in part 1 and part 2. However, we are adding now final fluid, our real-time smoke and fire effect. Let's dive into the specific setups we have here. And I'll first start with our thinkingParticles setup, and we'll just have a run over of the basic setup we have here. However, as I mentioned, it's what we learned in part 1 and part 2. Instead of creating particles per second, because I just want this one impact, that's a hero shot, one impact, I'm using a particle draw where I just create one particle and I create that particle right at frame 20. We can see that here. And I'll use the alignment and direction. So I have also an angle. So our explosion should go the opposite way of our impact direction. And we control the size as well of this position particle. Then we have our position tool, which is still in development and in alpha version. However, it's the same thing you saw in part 1, part 2. The adjustment, the curve, the look of our explosion. Nothing to explain here. We did that. And then the only new thing is we assign now rigid body dynamics. So we assign rigid body dynamics to the debris particles and to the sand particles. Oh, by the way, let me just move back to the explosion setup. There is one difference we have to what we had in part 1 and 2. We are now using debris particles and sand particles. And practically what I'm doing is I'm giving them different forces or impulse or explosive forces. So when you look at it, our main explosion is is an impulse of 38 meters per second. So that's our main explosion we have there, the particles that are used for our volumetric effect, the smoke and fire effect. Then the debris particles, they are a little bit faster, so I want them to escape the dust so we can see actually our debris coming out. And then the same with the sand particles, they should be a little bit faster than our smoke or dust particles. So that's the only setup I did here, turned on these two settings, and now we have extra particles as well at the same time. So we get a lot of particles for our explosion. But besides that, everything is the same as our explosion setup. So let me go back here. So we assign to the debris particles based on when they are created, a rigid body, a shape collision rigid body parameter set. So now every particle has its own rigid body parameter set, and we do the same for the sand particles. The next and last setup is our simulation setup, and that's our bullet system. Actually, it's not bullet what we are using. I tried with bullet, but in that case, our shape collision is just unbeatable. it has some extra things or little magic things you can use with our shape collision. And that's also the reason why it's still used by all the pros out there when they do massive destruction sequences, like when Scanline does their huge, insane explosion stuff for Marvel movies. They usually rely on our shape collision rigid body solver. So all basic here, we have the floor. We use a special floor node. I'll explain later in the scene. So we're not picking the landscape. We have a special collider floor, and I'll show you in a second what I did there, because we don't want to have rigid body dynamics with 1 million or 10 million faces. So we don't want that. See, we have to be a little bit clever here. So the next thing here we do is we have this setup where we move particles out of the group. So whenever a particle collides with the floor, the collision has happened, I just want them move out of their existing group, either sand or debris. So I move them into trails, into this trails group. And when we look here, let me just unfold that. We have our expansion going here, tracer, debris, and trails. And I just move them into the trails group, but still it's in the physics simulation because we're using, let me just show you, we're selecting all of the explosion group as our physics simulation, rigid body simulation. So we choose the explosion and everything underneath will have physics effects. So why did I do that? On collision with the ground, I move particles, debris, and sand out of the group. The reason is I don't want them to create any more smoke or dust follow trails. I have for the bigger debris a dust follow trail effect, and to turn that off, because when they're lying on the ground, I don't want them to create dust. So that's why I move them out, and this stops the dust creation. And I'll show you the setup in Final Fluid, how we did that. So that's basically all the setup. And I forgot one thing, just go back. When we assign the rigid body dynamics parameter set, I do this little magic thing here, the delay frames. So this feature or function does, we are waiting with our calculation. So from the first happening of a collision, we're waiting 10 frames. So after 10 frames, we kick in with the physics simulation. So when the particles appear, we wait 10 frames. And that's because when we start, all the particles are stuck in one place. And that's deadly for any physics rigid body simulation because everything is stuck into each other. And that's a thing that never happens in nature. You can't have two concrete things stuck in each other. That's not possible. So that's the trick I use here, so that in the beginning we have no physics simulation because everything is practically one point. And then as it moves out, we kick in our rigid body dynamics. So that's the whole thinking particle setup. Pretty straightforward and easy. Now let's have a look. How did we do the smoke or dust effect? The dust effect was done with a Final Fluid. But before we go into the volumetrics, just forgot one more thing I told you I would show you is the rigid body. So I'll turn off our landscape. And now I'll reveal our collider floor. So our collider floor is just this little subset of our landscape. Let me just turn on the landscape again, and you can see they're overlapping. So now we have, or not overlapping, they're the same space. And I did another trick with our landscape when I turned that into mesh. I reduced the triangle resolution, because for the collision detection, it's totally fine. It's more than fine. And now I don't have to have the huge landscape of 2 miles by 2 miles. I don't have to use that for collisions because my impact explosion is very limited to this area. So what I'm using is this collider floor object for the actual collision with our rigid bodies, so they can collide with the floor and then roll on the surface. So that's the little trick I did here, instead of using this insane high resolution surface. And that's why I picked the collider floor as my collision object for our shape collisions solver. So now let's go to our final fluid. We can see here, let me just turn off the landscape so that we can see what we're doing here. So we can see these boxes here. That's our domain. Inside of this box, all our fluid dynamics will happen. Our smoke fluid dynamics will happen. And in that case, we want to simulate sand dust. So inside this box, everything will happen. So we shoot the stuff in here, and we have all the simulation going on inside. And what we have is two emitters. So we have a fluid emitter 1 and fluid emitter 2. So these two emitters are our debris and our main explosion particles. So the explosion particles are there, and the debris particles. And I wanted to separate them because I wanted to give them different colors. So because when we have a sand explosion, the sand mixes. So we have white or whitish, beige sand, and we have dark sand from deep below. So to simulate kind of this mixture between those two colors, let me just bring up the color range for our fluid emitter 2, and here we have a color gradient. So that's my color for the debris. And we can see that I have this set to local. So now I control only for this fluid emitter, I control the color. So I set this color, and what we also do is we use particles, and we use the debris particle group. So each debris will create the smoke trail or dust trail. So this is where I select, okay, I want from thinkingParticles the debris particle group, and now those particles will create the dust trail. And for the other fluid emitter, let me just switch to that. I use the global setting because I'm lazy. I could have done this also locally, but I started globally. So we are using the global setting. And for the global setting, I go back to our grid, which controls the global setting. Let me just collapse that. And there we have the darker sand. That's from our core impact throwing all around. That's my darker dust. So what we have now is a pretty simple setup for these two emitters. One emitter is the debris, one is our main explosion particles. And now it's just a matter of setting up the effect. So I'm going to activate now Final Fluid Real-Time Preview. I hope it works with the 4K recording and simulation stuff at the same time on the same machine. But let me just bring up the display. So now we see here in real time our explosion or dust explosion or crater impact. And this is how we can set up everything. And what you see right now is probably much slower than usual because we have, as I mentioned, the recording going on. But this is how you set it up. You can set up the color, the size, the density, and fading, all the kinds of effects you want to set up. We can do that in real time. And we have a lot of tutorial videos for Final Fluids out there. Check it out. Final Fluid for 3D Studio Max, the only real-time integrated smoke and fire plugin that allows you to do amazing things. And you don't need to use thinkingParticles with it. You can use any particle system. However, I suggest using thinkingParticles, as you can see, because the amount of control we have here is just insane. Let me now just go here and show you the material setup we have here. Oh, sorry, the wrong thing. I wanted to open the material editor. So here our material setup. For final fluid, we're using our FR volume VDB. We're not using the pyro VDB because we're not doing fire. We're doing sand dust. So what we are doing here actually is defining where we get our color from, because we use these FR volume VDB because it has the option to use a color grid. So what's happening now is it takes the actual color, the mixed volumetric color from final fluid, and that's really unique. We transfer the data through OpenVDB grids, and the colors are already mixed in there. So all we need to do is specify here the color grid, and then we grab the color from our final fluid simulation. And that's really powerful and really great. Let me just play back the video so that you see the full screen here. So that's the setup we use here, and this is how we can control the colors. And we can adjust now the colors here in real time within our explosion. Let me just go here, and let's say, for example, we want to adjust the color to something funny, like this here, for example. And now we have this color, and we kind of create now a fire effect, but we would need a better color gradient here to fire. So we can adjust all kinds of colors and fires, and we mix them. We can create 1, 2, 3, even more particle layers so that we have much more color variations. So I think you get the idea behind this setup. And it's a really very powerful setup because now we control everything with our particles in thinkingParticles. And then we have full control in final fluids and can use the real-time effects there. So that's the last part explaining the setup we have here. I covered all the setups we used. Mainly it's part 1, part 2. It's so easy to get the explosion looking right. Then you would just go put around your explosion the containing domain, your volumetric box around where the fluid simulation happens, and then add your emitters, point the emitters. Let me just show you again. Point the emitters, say the emitter is now a particle, and pick thinkingParticles, pick your particle group, and that's it. And there you go, in final fluids you have your nice explosion effect and have full control over it. How long the particles live, how fast they move, all kinds of effects. Very powerful, easy control and setup here. I thank you very much for watching this tutorial. I know this was a really long tutorial, but I hope you learned some good stuff. Once more, I want to remind you about subscribing to our channel. Clicking the bell icon, that would help us a lot. Thank you so much for watching this video, and if you like it, share it. It has a lot of information there how to create these kind of effects with 3D Studio Max. It's easy, fast, and fully procedural all the time. Thank you for watching.